PGA Nation, we are back. And we are back with a fun week. The John Deere Classic. Off to Illinois we go. And I am happy to report I finally dethroned Team Audience, who was on an epic streak. Did they end up tying the record for most in a row, or were they one short?
One short. Very admirable run, though, from the audience. And when you kick it over to me, I'd like you to introduce Dave, and we'll get this started that way with it. But I have some thoughts on last week's tournament, because it kind of exactly what I said was going to happen is what happened to me. And unfortunately, it gives you the number one pick this week. It gives you the victory, but a little salty with that.
Well, I am pleased to be in the victory seat. Finally, it's been a minute before I've gotten my win. The audience has been great, but I think we're only maybe halfway through the season, and the audience, this is probably the best run the audience has had that I can remember. So I love that. I love, like we always say, this is the best audience you're going to find in PGA podcasts, and you guys have been on an absolute heater. So you guys come back again this week at the John Deere and get another win. But of course, we called them the big guns this week to draft with us at the John Deere. If you guys follow along, you follow me, you watch anything I do with college football, you know Dave already. Me and Dave do a college football show. Me and Dave did work together at Win Daily. We welcome him to draft with him tonight. Dave, how you doing?
Guys, I'm so pumped. Thanks for having me. Golf is in the blood, just like college football, Joel. So it's just I want to say college football gets me to golf, and Phil's in the middle. Just love what you guys do here. Excited to draft with you guys. I play in a lot of one and dones. I play in several other fantasy golf leagues. So I'm dialed in and ready to see if I can maybe break the streak of the guests, because it seems like they've been struggling a little.
Yeah, Dave, we're excited to have you on. And I think, as you noted before we went on air, we've only had one guest drafter win this year. So can Dave get that second win? Are you going to make a change tonight? To be determined. Spence, tell us what happened last week.
Well, first of all, as you said, there's a lot riding on Dave's shoulders. There's only been one person who's won. He came back on last week. We tried to use him to dethrone the audience. Unfortunately, he ended up finishing at the bottom. But you look at the standings and where it stands, like Dave's got a lot on his plate right now. The guests that we've had on, we have a scoring system: 3 points for first, 2 points for second, 1 point for third, 0 points if you come in fourth, and then you get an extra point if your lineup cashes in any of those large field GPPs in those $5 tournaments. The guests are in last right now, so Dave is going to have to try to carry the mantle for them a little bit. A lot of pressure on his shoulders. What I wanted to say, though, before we got started on this show, I told you, Joel, and you were correct. I can't even blame you for this. I kicked the question over to you and Joe. I asked, should I take Tom Kim? Should I take Matt Wallace? I ended up taking Tom Kim, and what I ended up saying to that is, this feels like this is going to be on Friday night. This lineup's going to go 5 of 6. I'm going to be sitting here. Matt Wallace will have made the cut. It'll be a 6 of 6 lineup, and unfortunately, that's exactly how it ended up playing out. And even with all of that, you had Aldrich, and I was still in contention to potentially win that with Grazerman, just because I had a very top-heavy team that produced there. But, you won the playoff. You won the week. You do get the number one pick. If I could put in the number one pick for you, Joel, I would already do it, because I know exactly where you're going to go. And it's an unfortunate thing, because I do think there is a bit of an advantage to be had with that, but I won't spoil it. I'll give you the limelight when you get it in a little bit.
Well, I will add to that. Not only, did you have a great lineup, I had Aldrich. I also had 6 of 6. So to have 6 of 6 and Aldrich, and you still almost beat me, showed you how top heavy your team was. So you had a really good lineup as well. It was a good draft last week. Overall, it was just a really good show. You're following along. Stick to it this week. We're hot right now. I think we've had, at least I've had 2 pretty good weeks in a row. Spencer, you've been winning some bets. So, that's how PGA golf goes. You go on streaks. Right now, we're on the hot side of it. So follow along. Hopefully you win some money with us. But as the winner last week, that means I get to pick the order. And I went with myself first. And I think the pick is pretty obvious. I've been drafting this guy pretty much every week over the last month or so. Spencer, you'll go second. Dave will go third. Audience, you will go last. I will explain the rules in case you're new to the show tonight, how the draft works. But if you are an audience member, you will be able to participate along with the audience and draft a team. So make sure you're on YouTube, get in the chat, and get involved. Before we get into the draft tonight, Spence, I want to kick it over to you. What are you looking for on the course this week in Illinois?
Yeah, so TPC Deer Run, 7,268 yards, par 71. We get pure bent grass greens. It's not going to be that POA bent grass split. So that's something to keep in mind. But anytime you get one of these shorter courses that's going to feature wide open fairways and then larger than average greens, a lot of that data starts to point you in the direction of a pitch and putt contest. I don't know, Joel, if it's necessarily that simple this week, since there are additional metrics and nuance factors that we should probably be considering when building a model. But the one thing I do want to note for everybody out there is if you are viewing this course as anything more than a birdie fest, you're definitely doing something wrong inside the core of what the data is trying to say. Very quickly about the venue, it was built in 1999 by D.A. Weibring. It was built on a former Arabian horse farm. That's an interesting fact about it. Weibring used that natural rolling landscape of the land to create this venue that is going to stretch alongside this picturesque wooded ravine and on one of the area's famous rock rivers. You know, one of the things that we discuss almost every single week, and we get a lot of TPC properties that we get week in and week out, but one of the things I always say about TPC properties is they're very consistent in their builds. We always see layouts that mimic something along the lines of these beautiful courses made for television architecture, accentuation of birdie fest scoring conditions. And the tour believes that to be better coverage. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't love it from a betting perspective. That is a discussion that we could have for a different day. But one of the unique ways of how I built my model this week, past those common layouts that are going to be very easy to extrapolate, is I did want to look at proximity returns from this course historically, and then add in make percentage totals that we've gotten on record throughout this event's history. So I talked about this being a birdie fest. I want to see the guys that are creating the most opportunities, the guys that are most likely to make those putts once they get the opportunity to do it. And then from there, I'm adding on all those basic levels of the similar architecture, tracks that mimic this in general, all those rather simplistic viewpoints, including that TPC scoring. For me, I think that made my model a little bit different. That's kind of how I end a lot of these course breakdowns, it feels like, is we're talking like specifically here, even in sports betting, but like specifically here for DFS, it's important to not come up with the same exact answer as everybody else. I'm always trying to find ways that I can create a unique, different outlook. Doesn't mean that it's like vastly different from what the public has come up with, but a lot of that is at least enough, in my opinion, to deviate my model. But I don't know if either one of you two want to add anything to that.
I love it. Dave, talk to me. What else are you looking for this week in Illinois?
Yeah, I love everything Spencer says. And when you say, you know, I don't love to lean on putting stats for tournaments, but for this one, they do reign true. 35% of the strokes gained in the last 5 years have been from the putting, plus 26.9 strokes gained for the last 5 events. So I do think it is a putting contest. Like you said, wide open, greens and regulation, big birdie fest, absolutely. But one thing that I noted was that 47%, this is a great first-time winner track. 7% of winners here, it was their first-time wins in the last 35 years, the most on the PGA Tour. Not sure we're going to get there this year. This field's a little more balanced, but when we think about guys coming over from the Corn Ferry and such, you know, they could be in play because of that particular stat. So it's wide open. I'm with you guys, and also important for some Ryder Cup play too, right? So there's a lot in play here.
A lot at stake this week. Don't look over the John Deere. I think there's a lot running. It should be another fun week for us. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we are drafting tonight, a 4-man draft. And as I promised, for those of you who might be new to the show, this works like your typical fantasy football style snake draft. We're going to do 4th-man, the 4th team audience. You'll get 2 in a row. So when you pick, you'll get 2, and then we'll go back like in the snake. The big caveat here is you do need to make sure you can actually afford your lineup. So you can't just take all the best golfers. You have to actually be able to play your lineup in a real DraftKings tournament. Now, make sure if you're following along, get in the chat on YouTube, and you can draft along with team audience. The way it works is you make a nomination. Anyone can make a nomination. So as long as you're in the chat, just say whatever player you want team audience to take, drop them in. As soon as that person is seconded, meaning a second person says that person's name, that is the team audience's pick. So you can put a nomination in, you can second the pick. That will be the pick for team audience. I see we have a lot of regulars. Andrew, Albert, Jeff, Blind Beauty, Retail Ripper. Welcome to the show this week. We miss you guys. You guys are what makes the engine run this show. That's what makes our show so special. Would one of you like to volunteer to be captain of team audience and make sure the picks are locked in and keep the draft along. We love if one of you would step up to help out tonight to run the audience train. So if you're willing to do it, step up, jump in the chat, say you're going to captain the squad. Just making sure you lock in each pick as you go. As you can see, I didn't even have to say who I was taking. Spencer has already written it in, and that is obviously Ben Griffin, who I have been, for lack of a better way of saying it, touting very heavily for the last month or so, probably a little bit more than that. He's priced up. He's not the most expensive golfer. I'm sure Spencer will have something to say about the most expensive golfer, but he is the second most expensive, and rightfully so. I mean, he's playing unbelievable golf. You know, later at the end of the show, I'll give you my best bet of the week, which he is very much still a part of. But the way he's playing, I'm surprised they even put anyone ahead of him. I actually thought it could have been not maybe 13K, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they had priced him like a Scotty, like an 11K or something like that in this field because of how well he's playing. So I love Ben Griffin this week. I think the concern will be, what does the ownership end up at? I'm not actually seeing it that high at this stage. So if it's, you know, I actually see 23%, which is a bit high, but I can stomach that. If it gets above 25%, that's starting to get more than I would like. But under 25%, I'm still happy to go there. Spence, you're up with your second pick, but would love your take on Ben Griffin this week as well.
I see a little over 25% right now, Joel, but like kind of to just double down on your sentiment around this whole thing. I honestly think it should be more than that ownership percentage wise. And if you look at the betting market, and I don't want that to be the number one takeaway that everybody brings from this. Like when I ran my model this week, he's a pretty decisive favorite over this field. And that's including the guy who's actually priced number one that I don't really say negative things about. So we'll just leave it at that with it. But if you look at Ben Griffin in head-to-head matchups, whether it is against that aforementioned Jason Day route, Denny McCarthy, any of those names that are kind of in that $10,000 or plus section, he is substantially in front of those players in the head-to-head market, like minus 140 to minus 180 in a lot of those spots. And I think it's an understandable route of why that is. Like I said, he's the number one player in my model this week. And I would kind of make an argument, which is what's going to make this show interesting here. I think Ben Griffin is the optimal route of how you want to start a build. But now that means three teams can't go in that fashion with how they build. So you're going to get unique builds just from that alone with it. So I'll move us into the next pick here. I think there's a couple of different ways that I can go, but I'm actually going to do the exact same thing that I did last week with the same exact player. And I'm going to take Davis Thompson at 9,600. I do think you could consider Jason Day at 10,500. I kind of think that they're similar commodities this week for the most part between Thompson and Day, but I'd rather save $900. Thompson has won this tournament last year. Number one in my model in weighted strokes gained total on TPC properties. Talked about the rollover effects on those courses. He's also inside of the top 10 for me in strokes gained total on easy courses and top 10 in my model in strokes gained total in general. So I think you have a golfer who's trending in the right direction, a golfer that gets a course that is one of the bigger improvements that my model typically sees from him because of that TPC factor and a couple of those things mixed into the account there. I think Davis Thompson, if I don't get Ben Griffin, is kind of the optimal route of how I would prefer to start my build here, just because of the discount that I am getting in the $9,000 section.
Yeah, you get a heavy discount. You get the history. I mean, he won this tournament last year, so you know he likes the course. He can compete here. And we know you like Davis Thompson. So, you know, if you can get him off the board early, you will be happy, especially in what we would consider one of our JV fields where you're not going to see any of the big names like Rory or Scheffler or anything like that. Dave, I would love to go to you here. What are your thoughts on both Ben Griffin and Davis Thompson this week? And then you're up with your first pick.
Yeah, I love Ben Griffin. Unfortunately, I used him in my one and done last week, and he just didn't get me much, under 100K. But we know he competed. That was just a birdie fest, and he's been in every tournament. Love that pick. He's my number one player as well. We'll probably have him in close to 20% of my lineups. Big Davis Thompson guy too. And I think you guys may have heard the story. They have a Champions House up there that people have stayed in. Last three winners stayed there. Davis Thompson was one. Straka before that. Poston before that. Well, Thompson's back in there this year. 7 guys from University of Georgia. My guy who I'm about to pick is also staying in that house. I'm going to go with Denny McCarthy. Like you guys mentioned his name earlier. This is the kind of course for him that he just plays very well. He likes to say he plays better at tougher courses. I think he plays better at these easier courses. Yes, he's performed at tougher courses. But listen, in the past 3 years here, he's T7, T6, 6, right? He's been playing really well. He's ninth on the tour in strokes gained putting. That was one of the key stats I really wanted to, dial in on. And in his last 24 rounds, he's fourth overall in proximity to the pin from 100 to 150. We're going to have a lot of wedge shots here. So I like Denny to get close, be able to dial it in and knock in a lot of birdies. So I think the way he plays here, horse for the course, he's with his boys in the house, hanging out, going to have a good time. I'll go Denny McCarthy.
Denny McCarthy, yeah, great course history here. Another guy, a great TPC player, so you get another advantage there. Priced under 10K, a guy with plenty of upside. I like that pick. Team audience, you are on the clock. It looks like a ton of nominations already coming in. It looks like, what did Albert, did you agree to lock in team captain? Albert, we appreciate you. You are the hero that keeps the engine running. Albert, the MVP of the show tonight. Lock in Thorbjornsen as the first pick. Plenty of nominations in here for the second. So we'll need one more to get doubled to lock that in. But Thorbjornsen locked in as your first pick. Let's go back to you, Spencer. Do you like Thorbjornsen in this tournament?
I'm conflicted. I hate the ownership. I think it makes sense of why people are playing him this week. He is a top 11 commodity inside of my model. He even gets a little bit better when you add some of the metrics that I used kind of later throughout the week to try to find sharp action and movement. And some of that is just a lot of people betting Thorbjornsen that has moved it. But like if I'm directly comparing, I know there's a price tag difference between these names and you got to move up. Like I would rather play Denny McCarthy. I would rather play Davis Thompson. I think Thorbjornsen's fine. I don't necessarily love the ownership of what you're going to have to get just because he is such a volatile golfer. But this is an ownership-based answer of what I'm saying there. And then as far as McCarthy goes, just to go back to that point very, very quickly, I talked about Davis Thompson being the number one strokes gained player at TPC Properties. Denny McCarthy is number 2. So I think the start to this is kind of what I would have envisioned. I thought you were going to take Ben Griffin number 1, Joel, and then I thought McCarthy would be off early. I thought Thompson would be off early. I thought Thorbjornsen. Like if you kind of had me guess what I thought the top 4 picks would be in whatever order, this is probably what I would have landed on as my projection.
Ooh, all right. Well, we're on par so far, and it looks like Albert has locked in. But I think there might be a little controversy because it looks like Albert locked in Cootie. But if I'm looking at it, I think it looks like Glover's the pick. What are you guys seeing? Is it Cootie? I think it is Cootie. No, it's Cootie. Cootie's locked in. I'm sorry. No controversy. I missed the original nomination. Pearson, Cootie, locked in. Listen, this guy has a lot of potential, a lot of upside. He hasn't shown it as much recently. Dave, I thought you're about to comment. What do you think about the Cootie pick?
Well, I do love it. He's been red hot on the Corn Ferry Tour, right? Finishing, I think, in the top 5 in his last 3 events. He's got a lot of potential. Obviously, he had to cut his teeth here, go back, and now he's got a chance again. So I think he's high potential. Obviously, my biggest fear in DFS is ownership. I just think everybody's going to be locked into those numbers that they've seen. So while I do think he's high potential, he's also a high bust factor too.
I think I really would have liked him a lot more as a shot if he was in the 7K range.
Yeah, that's it.
Probably you got to pay up for him as one of your top 2 or 3 guys in the 8K range. I think it's a bit of a roll of the dice. Hey, come through. Team Audience is the hottest drafting team this year, so maybe Team Audience is right. But I will not probably be on Cootie this week myself. Dave, you're up with your second pick here. You got McCarthy. Where are you going from here?
Yeah, I'll go a little top heavy, and I mean the audience is on it, but I know they're good, so I feel good following them in this lead here. I'm going to go Jake Knapp. Just really liked how he finished last week. One shot out of the playoff. And even before that, he finished T27 at the Canadian Open. He's got really good putting stats too, right? Everybody thinks he's just a bomber. He's 19th, I think, on the tour this year in strokes gained putting, and he's good approach to the green. So I think this course lines up well for me. He didn't play great here last year, so that kind of horse for the course worries me a little bit, but he's only played once. I can see him rebounding. Jake Knapp is trending in the right direction, so I'm going to go with him as my next pick here.
Jake Knapp, one of those guys that tends to, be streaky. When he's playing well, you'll get a few good results, and then when he's not playing well, he kind of falls off the face of the earth. I think you're right. I think he is playing well. I think this could be a good time to buy.
I think he's 4th on the tour in birdie percentage. So he's a high birdie guy. And Spence talked about it earlier. This is a birdie fest. You want guys that are shooting for pins. He will.
Boom. All right. There you have it. Jake Knapp off the board. Spence, back to you. Would love to get your take on Jake Knapp and Pearson Coody this week. And then your second.
Yeah, I think you guys talked about it with Knapp. He seems to catch fire when he does. I thought he looked really good last week. He had every chance there on Sunday. If he could have made a couple putts down the stretch there, a few things that looked like they were going to drop and didn't. He could have won that golf tournament. I'm probably more aggressively bullish on Pearson Coody than maybe both of you seem to be on that. Not that you guys are against him, but 22 consecutive rounds of shooting par or better. So those are PGA Tour stats that come into the mix there too. So he's been good on the Korn Ferry Tour. He's been good during his PGA Tour starts. I actually think it's a pretty interesting price tag, and I'm hoping that as we get across over the next 24 hours, people see that $8,000 plus price tag and decide to not play him. If we could get him at sub 10%, I think he makes for a very advantageous name to consider. So I really like the Coody pick there. That was somebody that was almost certainly going to be a pick of mine at some point during this draft. I was hoping to get him later on. So I like that selection. For my name here, I'm going to take somebody that has very little ownership from what I see. It's less than 10%, but I want to make sure to lock in this name because I feel like now for a couple of weeks and, maybe we can change the trajectory that this has been on. I talked about Sam Burns a handful of weeks ago. He was one of my favorite plays on the board, had him as an outright, ended up losing in the playoff against Ryan Fox. Go back to 2 weeks ago. I had Tommy Fleetwood. Fleetwood ends up not getting across the finish line. Should have probably gotten to a playoff. Should have probably won the tournament at the worst case scenario. Didn't get across the finish line. And then last week with Max Grazerman, the same things happened. So, I will say, you talked about it, Joel. Like, I feel like there are different levels of being hot. There's hot when you're actually winning bets, and there's hot of you're getting into playoffs or losing by one stroke. And all three of those names, what they had in common is they were my pick to win the golf tournament when things ended up starting on Thursday. And the name that I am going to give on this show that is my pick to win this golf tournament is Sam Stevens. Stevens ranks second in this field for strokes gained total bent grass, seventh for expected tee to green, and then first for weighted strokes gained total. That profile is going to encompass one of the better returns that you get. Par 4 scoring lands in there. And then if you look at players, and this is cherry picking stats a little bit, but looking for players that were top 25 for total driving plus expected putting at this course, Stevens is one of them. Pearson Coody, who we just talked about, is the other one. And then there's a third one that we'll see if he gets taken. If he does, I will mention him at some point. But I really like Sam Stevens this week, and it feels like the market's a little too low on him. So I probably could have waited, but after the audience took Coody, I don't really want to tempt fate here.
Ooh, all right, go get your guy. That's the point of the draft. And I think you've been on Stevens. You've taken him at least once or twice in the last few drafts. So that is your guy, 8,300. Go get him in the second round. Before I go, I'd love to get your take, Dave. Are you interested in Sam Stevens this week?
Oh, absolutely. He's, like Spencer said, there's a lot to like about him as far as this course and his game that fits this course. Stevens, I was high on him very early in the year. I think he had a good Florida run too. So I can really see him, picking it up here. I think he's a guy that plays a lot of tournaments, if I remember correctly. So sometimes I think he gassed out a little bit in the middle here. I think he's ready for a late season run. So I really like Stevens a lot in this tournament.
Cool. All right, off the board. I got two. I know who I want. I'm trying to think how I can strategically draft them to the best chance I can get my full team. With my first pick, I'm going to start with value. I think in this tournament, one of the factors that I'm considering is a lot of these, because it's so watered down, right? We don't have a great top of the board. When you start getting down to the 7K range, there's a handful of guys down here that could have been priced in the upper 8K range, and they're probably the same talent level golfer as those guys. You can be really balanced by, picking and choosing wisely. One of the guys I'm taking here, who I actually think is severely underpriced, is going to be Mark Hubbard. Mark Hubbard at only 7,700. I thought he would have been in the upper 8K range. To get him discounted this much, feels really good. He missed the cut. He missed the cut at the U.S. Open, but you can kind of forgive that. That was a really tough course, and he really wasn't even that bad. And then last week he came back with the T13. His ball striking has looked really good. At 7,700, I think there's a rebound spot. I also thought he's just as good as a lot of these guys in that upper 8K, lower 9K range. So it allows me to get to Ben Griffin at the top of the board and still remain balanced. And with the next pick here, I'm going to follow it up with Ben Cauley. I couldn't Bud Cauley. I couldn't not draft Bud Cauley this week. As much as I take him on my team, this feels like a bounce back week for Bud Cauley to have another really good result. He loves these TPC courses. He's had a really good history here in Illinois at only 8,600. Again, I feel like the price is right. I actually did think he was going to be priced a little lower, but I don't think it was the wrong pricing. I think there's plenty of upside with Bud Cauley this week. So, and just going to show you, this is how you can still take a guy like Ben Griffin at 10-4 and have a completely balanced lineup. You don't even need to go down to the 6K range if you build your lineup right. So with that being said, go back to you here, Spencer. Are Cauley and Hubbard on your radar for this tournament? And then you're your third.
I really like what you've done with this lineup, Joel, like from top to bottom so far with it. One of the things that I've been incorporating into my model is I'm trying to figure out every single week what the optimal outlook is. What's the optimal start that you can get to a lineup? And I talked about it when you took Ben Griffin. Ben Griffin is the optimal start to the lineups, but both of those two names that you just talked about very frequently continue to pop up when I run some of these simulations inside of my model of what the optimal should be. So, I think if you look at this lineup and even with what you currently have left over right now, like you still have $7,700 left per pick. I think you probably have 3 of the top 15 optimal players, no matter how you're shaking it with it. So I really like the start of your build there.
The only thing you want to keep in mind, and we'll see how it shakes out, is ownership, right? Obviously, you don't want to run a lineup that's going to end up being, every guy being super owned. But Hubbard I'm only seeing about 14%, which should be okay. And then at Cauley, what number ownership am I seeing on him? 17. So they're all a little high. One of my picks will have to get different, but otherwise, I agree with you. Obviously, I like my start. All right, Spence, you got Stevens and Davis Thompson. Who are you taking with your third?
I'm also trying to figure out what is the best route for me to go to be able to get everybody that I want here. I'm going to gamble, and I'm going to leave somebody on the board. I'm going to take Kevin Roy at $7,400. Look at what Roy has done recently. 8th place last week, 18th at the RBC Canadian. Bunch of made cuts thrown into the mix there. And if you look from a statistical perspective, like Kevin Roy is not usually a name that pops so heavily for me. And he ended up grading pretty much across the board as a top 25 player. And some of those safety numbers got even higher than that. So I think this is a mispricing for him at $7,400. I think there's some hidden safety put into the mix there. I see 11% ownership, but it's kind of the reverse of what I did last week, I feel like, with Tom Kim, to where, to me, this is a steadier pick, and maybe we have the same outlook on Friday to where Kevin Roy is the one that prevents this one from being a 6-6 lineup, but I don't necessarily think it's quite the same outlook with it, so I will take Kevin Roy here.
Boom, Kevin Roy off the board. Listen, he's looked good. I mean, he made a run with, what is it? He was on the first round run, was it 2 weeks ago? At 7,400, there's some upside there with Roy. How about you, Dave? Are you interested in Kevin Roy this week? And then you're up with your third.
Oh, I had 2 players on my board. Roy was one of them.
All right.
So, nice pick. Definitely interested looking in that mid-range. And, talking about Hubbard, 3 straight, horse for the course, 3 straight top 30s here, or 32, I think, 16 and 13 and 6. So I like that pick a lot too as well. Roy's has been playing excellent, especially in his last 2 outings. So my eyes were there, but the one I also wanted to go with, so I'm happy he's there, is Nicholas Echeverria. Just the way he's been, what he played last week, obviously not before that, but was impressive. He's had some other impressive performances this year back at the Sony, but what got my eyes around his stats are he's 5th on the PGA Tour this year in putting, right? We have a wide open course. Again, looking at those kinds of things that I like to focus on for the John Deere. I want a guy that can roll it. He can get a little bit out of play. He can save himself with the putter. That's something Echeverria can do. So I'm excited. I think he's a good mid-tier range guy at 7,800. He gives me enough here to still be able to pop at about 7,600 average for my last 3 guys. So I'll take Echeverria.
I like that Echeverria pick. He's a guy that can pop. He's got those spiked ball striking wings where he can gain 4 or 5 strokes with his irons, and then he gets a hot putter. At 7K range, I think he's definitely one of those upside type guys that you can go after. So I certainly like that pick. Audience, you are back on the clock, and you have 2. So Albert, gather the troops. It looks like there's a few nominations, but nothing has been doubled yet. While we wait, we'll go back to you on this one, Spence. Are you interested in Echeverria this week?
I've been putting polls on my Twitter account where I'm taking some of the most popular bets, some of the most popular DFS plays, just asking the consensus of my followers of who's most likely to burn the public of the names. And with Echeverria there, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I know we have 3 different pronunciations going, but every single time he has been the least picked name that people think are going to burn their lineup. So I thought that was something interesting, and it's like substantial. Like he's less than 10%. Like I think on the last poll that I put up, Thor Bjornsson was probably 30-something%, and it was the number 1 name of what people thought were going to burn, which is interesting. That's where the audience went, because I feel like a lot of people who listen to the show probably voted on it in that poll. But the public seems to like him, and they don't think he's going to burn them. So I mean, it's going to be an interesting outlook with him. I don't know if I'm necessarily as bullish as everybody else seems to be with it. I had him as a fringe top 40 play. Sometimes that worries me once we start getting high, hefty ownership.
I was gonna say I heard it in your voice. Like even though the audience and the public likes him, I could tell in your voice you weren't as high on him as everyone else. So to be determined, we shall see. But great job, Team Bonnie's getting the 2 picks locked in. Lucas Glover off the board. Chris Kirk off the board. Lucas Glover, I was planning to take with my next pick. I like Lucas Glover this week. You know, it almost feels like with Lucas Glover, there's certain tournaments you got to pick your spots with. This feels like a tournament where you want to go to Lucas Glover. Not only does the name Lucas Glover just sound right for the John Deere Classic, right? It just seems like he fits there well. The reality is he actually has played really well here. He's got a great course history. He won the tournament in 2001. He's got you a top 10 in 23, a top 25 in 2024. He strikes the ball really well. The biggest thing about Lucas Glover that I like about this week is that he's really not a good putter, but he's gained strokes putting on this course each of his last 3 times. So if he's going to be neutral or positive putting here with his ball striking, you should get a really good result in what is a pretty watered down field. Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you interested in Glover or Kirk this week?
Kirk, absolutely. I mean, I know there's some thoughts, he could be a little burnout from, losing in that playoff. Tough one, long playoff against Potgieter, but I think he's trending in the right direction. He's motivated. We're getting the good Chris Kirk right now. And when you get that, I think it's a guy you got to ride the hot hand. Glover, he burns me so much. It's just a personal opinion with him. Every time I think it's time, he's my 5 out of 6 that misses. So I'm just a stay away from Glover right now. But I don't think it's a bad pick. These are the types of tournaments where Lucas Glover can really get hot.
Boom. All right. Dave, you're up here with your 4th. You got about $7,600 per pick to spend. Where are you going with your next pick?
Yeah, this one's tricky. I think I'm going to go a little off the grid. Now, it's not off the grid when you talk about the John Deere Classic, but it's off the grid with kind of, recent form. It's been okay. But I'm taking someone who shot 59 here last year. That's Hayden Springer. He battled well, and what we've seen from him, he's a high birdie percentage player, and that's what we love here, right? He's in the top 20 in the PGA in birdie percentage. I think he's 29th in birdie average. His putting's actually pretty fairly decent. I think it's 41st overall on the tour. And a guy that just is familiar with the course and has that good vibes going on. Springer finished 34th last week. He was able to make the cut, had a, probably a disappointing weekend, popping 270s out there. But I like Hayden Springer, especially in the 6,900 range, and a guy with a potential to shoot 10 to 12 under. I'll take Springer.
Ooh, all right. Hayden Springer off the board. Spence, I'd love to hear your take. Are you interested in Hayden Springer this week? And then you're up with your 4th.
I wrote an article for Rotoballer talking about how in general, and this does not fit with Hayden Springer here, how in general, though, I am very low on the $6,000 range this week. I think that that's a section that you don't necessarily need to go down, and I think there's a lot of spots where you can avoid it. Hayden Springer, for me, is one of the true playable commodities in the $6,000 section. He's a top 35 golfer. He's the highest ranked $6,000 golfer that I have. The stats really like him inside of my model, and I'm trying to find different ways to get him either inside of DFS builds. I'm playing him in season-long contests. Like I've picked him up off the waiver wire to play this week in some of those season-long fantasy contests. I think Springer makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of different ways that you can deploy him. And what ownership do you see on him, Joel?
On Springer, I have 5%.
Yeah, I have even less than that. So somewhere between 3 to 5%, we'll call it. Like from a leverage answer, it's one of the heftier leverage returns that you can find of the $6,000 golfers. If I ran through it, you might be able to find a little bit better, but I think a lot of those names are more so cash game plays, like the Zach Johnson and those names that have been historically good. Like Springer has more true upside in this tournament, which is why for GPP contests, I would rather pinpoint him than some of those options.
Ooh, all right. Springer's off the board. Spence, you got about 8K per pick left, a little bit more than that. Where are you going with your fourth?
So I'm going to take a volatile golfer here. It's a name that I seem to end up on quite frequently, but I'm going to take Alex Smalley. We've kind of gotten this boom or bust return from him recently where it's either inside the top 30, miscut. That happens nearly every single start. And when you look at the track record, he missed the cut last weekend. Technically, that probably indicates a surge is about to happen if we use that flawed math to try to figure out what he's going to do. But like all jokes aside on that, Smalley's statistical profile is really intriguing. There's a reason why he's almost won at this tournament in the past. He cracked the top 10 of my overall ranking this week. That's the first time he's done that the whole year. I went through and I back tested to see if there was another occurrence of that. There is not. There are some high-end upside marks that got him there, never from an overall rank. And then he also placed 9th in my model for weighted strokes gained total and 10th at easy scoring property. So I think he has the exact blueprint to bounce back. And if people inside of the DFS community want to overlook him for any reason because of last week's performance, I'm just going to keep looking at that second place finish from him that, I mean, you could make a strong argument he should have won that golf tournament. I had Sepp Straka that week, and I've talked about all the bad luck that I've had recently. That was one of the better outcomes where Straka stormed the leaderboard, ended up catching Smalley, and Smalley became, I mean, for lack of a better term, not a real golfer at that point. Like the pressure got to him and he crumbled on it. But I think like, let's overlook that. Let's overlook what he did last week. And I think this is a really nice price tag on him. Like we talk about optimals, Smalley pops inside of my optimal more frequently than almost any of these $7,000 golfers.
Well, you know, I was just looking at Smalley myself. I like Smalley too. I think there'll be a handful of people that overweight the miscut last week. I think we say on this show often, you got to forgive 1 week. He's not a completely different player. He had a bad 2 days. He can bounce right back and have a great result, which should help with the ownership. So at under 8K, I thought Smalley, you know, if Smalley gave you a top 20 last week, he probably would have been 9K. All right. But because he missed the cut, now you're getting him at under 8K. You know, 1 week doesn't change him one that much. Obviously, we're not pros, but how often do you go out and stink and then the next time you go out and play pretty well? Like that same thing can happen with Alex Smalley this week. So I really like the pick there. All right, I got 2 here, and I'm pretty locked in on who I'm taking. I'm just trying to figure out which order I need to take him in to make sure that I can have the most effective round. I'm going to go back to what worked for me last week. And I know there's a bit of like a hangover when you win a tournament. Are you going to come back and be able to do it again? But Aguiar is really not priced up that much. I mean, you're still getting him at 7,900, under 8K. The ownership is still under 10% from what I'm seeing. I think from what the numbers that I'm seeing, he actually leads the players in the field, and birdies are better gained, which obviously is what you're going to need here this week. He's making putts. The ball striking is good. I mean, just the overall game is just in really good form. My biggest concern is he going to have a win hangover from last week? And that's a fair concern, but he doesn't have to win this tournament. If he comes back, we can get you top 15.
Hangover, he's under 21, so I think he'll be all right.
They recover much quicker. So
he was counting I know. Yeah.
But listen, he was really striking the ball well. I mean, everything you look at, I feel like if he got like 4th last week instead of winning, he would probably have been one of the first 2 rounds this week. So I like Aguiar again. I'm going back to the well there. And then with my next pick, I'm going to take a funny one here. And I thought about this a lot. There's a world where I could have just gone a different direction here, but my gut is telling me to go with this guy, so I'm going to do it. And that's Jackson Suber. I'm going to take Jackson Suber off the board here. He's only 7K, but if you look at deeper dive at how he's been playing, and it's not just last week, he was really good at the RBC Canadian Open as well, which was only a couple weeks ago. His ball striking has been excellent. I remember watching him on Sunday and being like, this guy isn't missing shots. I mean, I was watching him Sunday. He was just striking everything, putting him right near the pin. And to the point you were making earlier, Dave, he's gained 1.9 strokes putting at the Charles Schwab, 2 strokes putting at the Canadian Open, 5.6 strokes at the Rocket Mortgage. He gained 5 strokes on approach at the Canadian Open, almost 4 strokes at the Rocket Mortgage. This guy's game is in really good shape. I think he can get, and again, in these watered down fields at only 7K, I think he can give us another really solid showing this week. Spence, would love to get your take. Is Jackson Suber on your radar?
I was kind of surprised how high he graded in my model. That's not necessarily like he popped off the page for me, but he was inside the top 40 in a lot of the iterations of how I looked at my model. And as I've always talked about, that may not seem like a surprise to some people because, yes, we were just talking about him last week when he came in 6th place, 18th place before that. But I run things from a longer term duration than most people. So those 2 tournaments don't necessarily have the effect in my math like it would in some models. So for him to return the way that he did, I thought was interesting with it. I don't really have a strong take necessarily one way or another with that, but I do think that the value at $7,000, I certainly think that's something that you can consider there. I will make my next pick, Joel. I feel like now I've talked about Tom Kim way too many times on the show. I'm not picking Tom Kim here, but I feel like this is the Tom Kim pick, maybe more so of what actually is going to end up occurring, where I wrote about this yesterday, and I'm a really big Eminem fan. Like, he's my favorite artist of all time. And if anybody saw the picture, I took Michael Kim's face and I said, will the real Michael Kim please stand up? And it's Michael Kim's face just spread across all the Eminem wannabes with the big Michael Kim being the Eminem picture in it, essentially. But you look at what he's done at this course, wins it in runaway fashion a handful of years ago, wins by 8 shots. Since then has not made a cut at this tournament. And something has to give here, in my opinion, because he has seen a bit of a resurgence this season. I've thought that he has looked like a different golfer this year in years past. The upside model, the statistical profile really likes him for this event. There's something to be said that he has not made the cut at this tournament. If you do look at any of the expected predictability of the course, it's not the most predictive course from year in to year out. So, I mean, if I think Michael Kim is playing well, I'm more willing to take a chance in this spot here. But I bet him at 50-1. I really like him on upside markets. I see him at less than 10%. I certainly understand the downside that comes into play. The most unfortunate part, though, with this Michael Kim pick, and I'm going to be very honest with this lineup moving forward, there are a lot of players that I wish that I had the ability to get to. Like, as I put this in right now, it leaves me with $8,600. I would like Bud Cauley at $8,600. I would like Pearson Coody at $8,400. I would like Mark Hubbard at $7,700. A lot of those names are all those names there are gone. So I was going to take Lucas Glover if like this would have been a different situation. And I think I would have built this lineup a little bit differently with it. But I might end up leaving a lot of money on the table. We'll see how much it ends up actually being. But I don't think there's a huge difference with a lot of these lower $7,000 golfers and what you actually get in the 8s.
I 100% agree. I'm going to leave a good amount of money on the table as well. This is a week where you don't definitely don't have to feel like you need to force spending all your money. Play the lineup you like. Don't feel like you need to get to the top or only pick a guy because you can afford them. You know, this is, you can get value. That's what I did here. I'm regretting a little bit my last pick. It's like, I could have afforded someone more, but I think that's a silly thought process in a tournament like this. So with that being said, Dave, we'd love to get your take on the last few picks, particularly Michael Kim, Jackson Suber, and then you're up with your 5th.
Yeah, I'll admit Suber wasn't as much on my radar, so I'm going to have to dig a little here and see if there's someone I want to sprinkle in my lineups. But you guys talked about leaving money on the table. I think I had that strategy too, and then I played with a few people, and I said, I'm going to be good. Here's where I'm going to go. And Michael Kim was one of those. So now I got to go back to the drawing board a little bit. So good pick there, Spence. I do think he kind of fits a really good profile for this course, especially if you look at the similar courses that the the John Deere and the Quad Cities that they play to, he's done well at. So I think that's a great pick. And but it leads me, and I'll figure out where I'm going to go after this. I got a few, but you left one that I did want, and that's Andrew Putnam. Over the past 2 tournaments, he's played really, really well, finishing 6th and 8th. As we know, he had to share the lead going into the weekend, kind of fizzled out up there in Detroit. But his stats are just the kind of things I want to look at when I'm looking at this tournament. He's 26th overall in strokes gained on the PGA Tour. Where does he struggle? Off the tee. He's 164th off the tee, but he's 36th in approach. He's 13th in putting. He's driving accuracy 6th, but really where I dial him in, he's 11th in green and regulation percentage at 70%. Over the past 5 years, the 5 winners have averaged 81% GER here. I mean, that's huge. Straka was almost 85%. I mean, it just blows your mind how big these greens are, but you got to hit them, right? So he's a guy that I think will hit a lot of greens here and can follow that trend. So I like Andrew Putnam's game right now, and I like the course for him. So together, and the price I think is very fair. His ownership percentage isn't huge, so I'll take Putnam at 7,600.
Andrew Putnam off the board. We're going to talk about, before we do, audience, you're on the clock. It looks like one pick is locked in. We need one more. So keep those nominations coming. Double that last pick to finalize the squad. While we wait, we'll go back to you here, Spence. Are you interested in Andrew Putnam this week?
Definitely one of the options I was considering. So, Dave, if you feel like you got me back a little bit, you may have. Putnam was somebody I was considering. Recent approach surges. The other thing I will add to that is if you look specifically from that, we'll call it 75 to 175 yard proximity range. I talked about it earlier. I run my data from a longer term perspective. So you're going to look at the recent approach stuff and it's going to look really good. In general, Putnam is not a name that usually pops for approach play for obvious reasons. But if you look from that 75 to 175 yard mark, he's nearly 50 spots better in my model than what his baseline says that he is just on any general course. So I think this is a really nice spot for him. Top 15 projected upside golfer for me. So if we're talking about GPP contests, that's a name that can work himself up the leaderboard. So I agree with what Dave said. I think that this is a very intriguing option at just 10% ownership where there is real upside to be had with Putnam this week.
Ooh, Putnam off the board. Audience, great job getting your picks locked in. Sammy Valimaki and Cameron Champ. Cameron Champ, who looks like he might be having a resurgence. He hasn't been playing that much, but when he's out there, he has looked good. I like that round there, by the way. I think those are 2 solid picks. We'd love to hear your take, Dave. Are you interested in Cameron Champ and Sammy Valimaki?
Yeah, I actually Cameron Champ for sure. A guy that really found some dark days of golf earlier in the year, has found his way back. And he's a guy to cheer for, just his story behind the scenes. And I mean, everybody thinks about his length, but he's got a lot of game, and really where around the greens, I think he's really gotten a lot better. So I'm interested in Champ. And Valimaki was a guy I played a lot last year. Hasn't been as much on my radar this year. Interesting pick. I'm not 100% down into his status here at this course, but I do know his game, and it is very impressive.
Cool. All right, great job, team. Audience. Dave, you got your last pick here. You have 8,400 to spend. Michael Kim was a steal. How are you going to pivot and round out your squad?
Yeah, I mean, right now, 8,400 is Pearson Coody. I would like to just round this, and I know he's already been direct. I'm saying when I'm playing my other builds, I really would happily land on Pearson Coody right now with these 5 and say I'm feeling pretty good, right? But I can't. And then Steven's going, Kim going. I'm going to go. I'm not going to leave a ton on the board. I thought about a few other guys. I know Ricky is sitting here playing for, move up in the FedEx Cup rankings. I don't love where his game is at currently. I'm going to go Victor Perez. Perez was a hot name going into last weekend's tournament, right? He had finished 9th and 19th, and then he just didn't get going last week and had a bad weekend, but he did finish with a 69 on Sunday. I think you can sometimes take away some of the things. And now he's probably going to be low owned because he didn't have that great week. People got burnt by him. Well, instead, I'm going to try and reuse him this week at 7,500. Perez has been in really good form lately. I'll take him here and hope his game fits what we like at John Deere.
I was considering Perez here with my last pick too. There's a handful of guys in this mid 7K range that I think are all very viable, very good plays. Perez being in that mix. I'll make sure we list all those guys before the show wraps up. But I think what makes it interesting is what we were saying about leaving money on the table and not needing to spend it all. There's probably 4 or 5 guys in that 7K range that I thought could have been $1,000 more and wouldn't have batted an eye. So, a lot of these guys in the 8 and 7K range are interchangeable, which allows you to be really creative and unique in how you make your build. But Victor Perez is one of them. Ball striking. He even made some putts recently. Plenty of upside there. So I love the Perez pick. Spence, how about you? Are you on Victor Perez this week? And then you're up with your last as well.
I think it's a good selection. It was somebody I was considering also. I know we've kind of all exchanged that sentiment over and over again. And maybe that means it's a good thing that we're all on the same page there. It's something to at least be noteworthy of, that when push comes to shove and we're all trying to make decisions, a Victor Perez, a Pearson Cootie, like all these names keep popping up. As Dave talked about, if I could have an entire pick of this board, give me Pearson Cootie or Bud Cauley. Yeah. There's one of those two names would be very easily of how I would like to end this. But with that not being an option, I'm going to dip into the $7,000 section. And for me, the pick came down to either Kurt Kitayama or Rico Hoey. I am not going to take Kitayama for one reason. It has not worked out a single time this entire year that I have taken him in any King of the Draft show. I think he has burnt me. Like Dave talked about it with Lucas Glover. Kurt Kitayama is my Lucas Glover. I cannot seem to get the guy correct. My model loves him this week. I will play him. If you give me 6 players that I get to pick here, there's got to be a different route than I can go than Kurt Kitayama. So I will take Rico Hoey, who is one of those upside climbers in my model. The putter, you could make an argument. And yeah, I mean, Kitayama is a hard fade. I don't really know how anybody could have any other take than that. The dude literally burns every single lineup every single week. As far as Hoey's concerned, the putter's bad. The ball striking's elite. If at any point he can just be neutral with the putter, the upside is really high. And I don't have him currently as an outright right now, but the more I continue running numbers on this board, I'm probably going to add him at some point in that 80-1 range. So consider that probably an official bet before Thursday gets here, as Hoey is an outright too.
Boom, Rico off the board. I know his name got thrown around a few times. I'm glad he actually got taken this week to round out your squad. For me, I'm glad this guy lasted. I was afraid he didn't get taken. I'm glad he got back to me. I think it's a bounce back spot. I'm going to leave a good amount of money on the table here. I'm going to take Keith Mitchell. Keith Mitchell, if this tournament was a month ago, 6 weeks ago, he would have been priced maybe the most expensive guy in the field, $10K, right? And now what? He hasn't even been that bad, right? He wasn't great last week. Obviously, he missed the cut at the Rocket Mortgage, where he was just awful off the tee and awful putting, which for him is just not him, right? He's really good off the tee typically. I think he corrects that and does well this week. He struck the ball well last week, right? If that we can carry over, he'll do fine. And if he can find a putter, which I don't think he'll be as bad putting this next week as he was last week. If he gains strokes putting, I think he gets you another really good result. He also has a good course history here where he's teed off a few times. He's gotten you a top 10. He's gotten you in 2018, a top 20. Last time he came out here in 2024. He likes these TPC courses. I think there's plenty of upside in the 7K range on Keith Mitchell. That is a wrap for the draft tonight. Make sure you smash that like button and give us a follow. It goes a long way. Let us know what team you think is going to take it down this week, as we do every week. We'll come back next week. We will crown a king of the draft, and we will do it all over again. But there's always bragging rights. So pick a winner. Who do you think is going to win? So we can come back and crown the champion. So Spencer will post the lineups as he does every week. You let us know which one you like the most. Me personally, of course, I like my squad, but I thought Team Audience also had a really nice draft tonight. I think it should be I think all teams are pretty good here. So I think it should be a really fun, competitive week ahead of us. Before we get out of here, I want to start with, who are you surprised did not get drafted tonight? And we'll start with you, Spence. Anyone you're surprised got left off the board?
Probably Kevin Yu for me. My model liked you a lot. The other thing that I'll at least go to, and I don't know if we influenced this whatsoever. I I mean, if you look at the very top of the board, like Day and Poston ended up not getting taken. It's interesting that multiple players in that $10,000 section got bypassed. Whether that ends up being correct or not is not even what my viewpoint is trying to be with it. Like, I think more from an actual pick, I would say Kevin Yu, but it's always intriguing when you have $10,000 plus golfers that don't go off the board. We're not really mentioned much in the chat to begin with. We kind of bypass them over and over again, and we all made decisions. Like I talked about, I would rather go to Davis Thompson than to go to that group. You made the decision, Joel, that you would rather go to Ben Griffin, which I think is the correct decision there. And then the audience kind of flirted more in that like $8,500 to $9,100 range rather than going up. So I think it's probably the correct outlook with it, but I'd be curious to see where ownership ends up landing with those names.
I think that's a fair point. How about you, Dave? Anyone you're surprised did not go?
Well, yeah, Day, probably just from the standpoint of, how well he played up at the Travelers. And, but, I'll give another name. Zach Johnson. And I only say that from a $6,900 player. He's a horse for the course, 19 out of 22 cuts made, 7 top fives, 3 runner-ups, a win. I know he's an older player, but I think someone, I was a little surprised knowing he's from that area and just loves it. So he is a guy I'll consider, but I'm probably a little surprised with his price point and his history here that didn't get drafted.
I think it's a good call. He does tend to play well these courses. He even seemed like he's been playing well recently, so it seems like he's combining some good form with a course that he likes. So I actually did consider him at the end there, but with one of my picks. But what I was trying to do when it came up, I couldn't make the salaries work, so I went in a different direction. For me, there's 2 names I want to throw out there. Is in that mid-70 range. There's a lot of guys in that range I like. I want to start with Emiliano Grillo. I mean, he's one of those examples of a guy who like bombed last week, so people are not maybe off of him, but I think he can easily bounce back and have a really good result this week. So don't be afraid of Emiliano Grillo. I also like Christian Bezuidenhout, one of those guys that you were mentioning, Dave, who can really get a hot putter. Mm-hmm. He can strike the ball pretty well. I think this is a type of tournament where you can see Bezuidenhout have some upside and maybe get you like a top 10. So if you're looking for ways to cram some of the top, if you want to play maybe Ben Griffin and Day or Poston in a lineup, you can. Right? There's plenty of value in that 7K range where you can make a balanced lineup work. All right, before we wrap up, go ahead, Spence.
I just want to throw out a name very quickly. I don't even know if I necessarily have a take one way or another on him, but do either of you guys have thoughts on Ryan Gerard? I'm a little surprised he wasn't taken also.
I played he would have fit right where I wanted in that 8K range, like I was saying, and I ended up going to Perez. I am actually almost went Grillo, but he was, I really looked at him strongly. I'm interested. I'm definitely interested. He's been playing well, so I think he is someone, and I think his ownership was a little lower in that like 9-10 range. So I do like him this week.
I'm torn. The ball striking is there. I can certainly see him getting there, but he's priced up at 8,500. I think there's other routes I'd rather take if I'm going to spend up for a guy who really right now can't make a putt. And I think that's my biggest concern. His putter has been so poor. I don't know if he can get there. The upside, if he was 7,800, I would get there. But if you have to use him as one of my top 2 guys, I think there's another route I would take.
117th in putting. So yeah, that did scare me a little.
I think Spencer didn't like my answer and just said
no, he didn't. It did. And I'll throw one more at you, Joel. And just a guy that you just never know. Sam Ryder. I mean, he's a top 10 putter. Yeah. He's a guy that's had some experience here and done okay. He's been terrible in the past couple of weeks. So when we talk about guys that are all formed that could maybe surprise you, Sam Ryder's another one that tends to play courses like this pretty decently and has the game for it.
He got you a T2 here back in 2018. It was a few years ago, but
yeah,
he has done it. So Sam Ryder's an interesting name to keep an eye out on. Last segment is there, and I tease this at the beginning of the show, so I'll kick this one off. I every week before we end the show, we do it. If you have a bet of the week, one bet you really like, and every week I've been giving out Ben Griffin, and it's in the safest form: a top 30 with Ben Griffin, a top 40. I'm going back to that well this week, and he's been hitting every week, right? And even in the weeks that you're almost looking like, oh, he didn't do that well, you got you what 13th. He hasn't done worse than a top 15 in the last 5 weeks, and this is the weakest field he's playing in. You can get him at pretty much. I mean, maybe it's like minus 130 or something. But you can get him at even money, basically, to get top 20, which would be his worst result if he gets 20th that he's had in the last 5 weeks in the weakest field. You got to think in this field, top 20 with the way he's playing, he should be able to get to. So I'm going to go back to what I've been playing each week, at least the last 3 weeks. We're going Ben Griffin, top 20, hammer that in. Dave, how about you? Do you have a bet of the week for us?
Yeah, I'm going to go based upon value here. Last week I did get a little action on Pot Geeter 110-1 outright. I like to play a handful of them. So if I'm only giving out one, and I'm going to give an outright just because it's shot in the dark and I can just recycle the couple bucks that I won last week, I am actually going to go down. I like the below 50-1 range this week. And I'm going to look at Kevin Roy. I'm going to go plus 6,000 on Kevin Roy. I just, I'm going back to the first time winner stuff that I kind of like, and his game, where it's at and how it matches up to his course. I know Spencer drafted him. I'm high on him this week in DFS, and I think it's a really good number at 60. You can get 65-1 in some spots, but right now looking at bet 365, 60-1.
60-1. I like the number. Just to toot my own horn, I also had Pot Geeter last week on an outright, which I was pretty pumped about. So I think the team, the fam, got a big win. We're putting it back out there this week. A 60-1 would be a nice hit. Spencer, I thought you didn't like my answer, so you just left us.
I think I brought up Ryan Gerard, and they tried to shut me down that they didn't want that name to be put out into the airwaves here. I had the opposite. I had Max Grazerman last week, so didn't have quite the same luck there that ended up coming to fruition for me. I assume the question is, what is the best bet this week, Joel?
Exactly.
I'll go back down the Rico Hoey line. I took Rico Hoey this week over Tristan Lawrence. I think that price was a little bit mispriced there. There's a lot of different options in the head-to-head market that I kind of like. We talked about Cameron Champ earlier in the show. I think Cameron Champ against names like Max Homa could potentially make sense. I really like Sam Stevens if you can find him potentially in a matchup. And then just for some like random names, which I know you talked about Emiliano Grillo, Joel, but like Emiliano Grillo, I think Max McGreevy for DFS makes some sense. I talked about Kevin Yu, maybe Jacob Bridgman. I feel like Jacob Bridgman is another name, Joel, that we kind of bring up a lot on this show and didn't get drafted this week. I don't have a reason whatsoever why you shouldn't take him. I think he should be in your player pool. So I'll go with the Rico Hoey route though against Tristan Lawrence. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad sign that I didn't get kicked off this time once mentioning those plays. The books might like that one a little bit better.
I don't know if I said this earlier, but I like the Kevin Yu pick this week as well. He's a little priced up at 8,800, but this does seem like the type of tournament where it's watered down, where he certainly should have some upside. Well, that's a wrap for the show. I know I said it before, but do us a favor. If you're still on here, smash that like button. Give us a follow. It goes a long way. A big thank you to Dave Gloeckner coming on, drafting with us tonight. If you don't follow Dave already, make sure you give him a follow. You will make more money, whether it's in golf, it's in football, you name it. Dave plays every sport, and he's very knowledgeable in them all. So follow Dave. You'll get some more wins. Dave, tell everyone, where else can they find you this week?
Yeah, a couple things looking at on X at DGleck, and Spencer tweeted out earlier, so you get the handle there in his tweet. And then bellringersports.com, writing some articles there, and also on the Sirius radio show every Sunday night or every other 7 to 9 with the Win Daily team. So I'm all around. Always reach out, and this was just so much fun for me, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, not only will you have fun following Dave, you will certainly make more money. So make sure you give him a follow. Good luck this week. And Spence, what did I forget?
Yeah, shout out to Win Daily. I have that hat also in my closet. Should have probably worn it for this show. I think all of us here, I mean, I technically got my start over at Rotoballer, but Jason Mizrahi over at Win Daily was the second person to ever reach out to me in this space and give me the opportunity. And a lot of that was because Nick Bretwish reached out for me to do better golf with him. And but I mean, everything that we did over at Win Daily, like I'm very proud of what we put together. And obviously, Joel, you and I have moved a iteration of this show over here to the Mayo Network. But without Win Daily, like none of this, we would not be having this show today without that. So a shout out to you, Joel, for having the idea to even turn it into a draft like this. And then shout out to Jason Mizrahi for letting us host it for a very long time over on Win Daily.
Shout out to Win Daily, Jason Mirzahi. We appreciate you. I'm going to give one last sign up before we sign out here. Shout out to the audience. You guys followed us around from different networks, different shows, different iterations of the show. You guys are the best audience in DFS. We certainly appreciate you guys. We can only do a show where the audience drafts our own team if you guys are super engaged. That's why this works. So we appreciate you. You guys are the real MVP. Good luck this week. Let us know how much money you make. Follow along with us. Follow along on Twitter. Pick the winning team. Come back next week. We'll crown a new champion.